This is the Emotion Connection, where you'll experience health through feeling. Explore emotion from a different perspective and learn how to use your emotions to improve your day-to-day life. Introducing your host, founder of the Emotion Research Institute and creator of Emotional Strength, Sharon Fay. Sharon heads up a successful business empowering leaders to bring about organisational development and cultural change. Get your senses ready as we delve into the many facets of emotion together. Over to Sharon.
Hello, I'm Sharon Fay. Emotion is my thing. And today we're going to do an unusual thing, another Q&A on episode 7. Episode 7 on vulnerability is really having a big impact on our listeners, and people are asking lots of questions, and I know I've already done a Q&A on vulnerability, but this is another one because these questions are very deep and I think listeners will get a lot out of it. And so first of all, I'll read the question out as verbatim as it was asked, and then I will dive into the deep answer. And that may help a lot of you understand a bit more about vulnerability. It's very, very important topic, and I'm going to be talking about that in leadership as well. Vulnerability is a big advantage if you can develop that capacity to experience vulnerability. The first question is, what is emotion as a broader concept than emotional strength? Is it something that exists within us, between us, or in spite of us? And the context the listener has given for this question is, it doesn't feel like we can control emotion. So can we say that they belong to us, or are they just something that we tune into consciously or unconsciously? And as you can see, this is a very deep question. And I'll start with saying that your definition, anybody's definition of emotion really depends on the speaker or the philosopher. And as we said before, William James asked this question, what is emotion? And through more than 100 years later, emotion is still quite a complex idea, and there's lots of different definitions on it. So the Institute really suggests that emotion is a relational process between a whole living being, which is you, and the situation that is meaningful to you. So it's as a person in the context of our life, really. And from my perspective, emotion captures the whole being. So it's the whole of you. I believe we are born with the capacity to feel. And the way I came to that understanding is that we had to be able to feel emotion, because when a baby's born, it can feel sensory things. It does have instincts like suckling and breathing and eliminating waste, hunger, thirst. All these are autonomic responses to life. And so just like all of those autonomic responses, I believe that we actually did have immediate sensory capacity, which is feeling. We didn't have language. Baby doesn't have language, or the cognitive development hasn't really started to happen. And there's sensory perception, so there's feeling. So that's how I came to understanding that we actually did feel at one point, and then before we became suppressed with life. It is true that we don't feel like we can control our emotion, because we've all experienced that. But when we're in our bodies and connect to whatever we're feeling, then we're not at effect of anything really. And by at effect, I mean that when you're at effect in life, you feel powerless, you feel like you're in the passenger seat of the bus of life. Somebody else is in the driver's seat, you're in the passenger seat. So when you're at effect, you don't have any power, you don't seem to have control, and you're just going in a direction that's possibly not right for you. So you're in the passenger seat. So what we want to do is we want to put you in the driver's seat of your life so that you can go in the direction that makes sense to you. So when we're in our bodies and feeling, we're taking ourselves out of the passenger seat, put ourselves in the driver's seat of your life. And so it's not about control, it's about connection. And it's not about emotion belonging to us. We can say that we're able to connect or feel emotion consciously. But if I consider unconscious connection, I am starting to refer to dispositional emotional strength, which I haven't spoken about yet. That will be a discussion that will come in future podcasts, because I talk about episodic emotional strength and dispositional emotional strength, so that will come later. So the second question is, what is the link between vulnerability, empathy, and emotional strength? And the listener gives a context again, which is helpful. It feels as though they are directly linked, i.e., greater capacity for vulnerability. The wounding idea of Aristotle seems to lead to a deeper capacity for empathy as well as emotional strength. Now, just so it's clear, that's the whole question from the listener. But the main question is, what is the link between vulnerability, empathy, and emotional strength? So my answer is that I resonate with the definition of vulnerability of McCoy, 2013. And she writes a wonderful book on vulnerability. And she says it's central to the human experience, which I believe, and the capacity to experience hurt as distinct from the state of actually being harmed. Now, I love this definition because it really is quite accurate with my experience of vulnerability. And while all raw feelings in the present moment can heighten a sense of vulnerability, emotional strength builds the capacity to experience all kinds of human experiences, including empathy. Although you can experience vulnerability without empathy. So it gets a bit complex here. So most definitions of empathy are referring to other. So if you have empathy for your mother, then you can feel that you have that sort of compassion for her. And so empathy, referring to the other person, is like putting yourself in someone else's position and feeling what they may feel. For me, empathy is about connecting to self first, and when we're connected to self, we are open to hearing others' experience. So in this way, the other person feels heard and feels that you have empathy for them. And in this moment, both of you resonate with each other. So it's not an empathy as I've got empathy for people. There's a whole research based on empathy and is it innate or can it be taught? But to me, it's not that. To me, it is a connection to yourself that facilitates empathy for you and then for other people. I hope that answers the question of the link between vulnerability, empathy, and emotional strength. The third question is, you say that other authors have said vulnerability is only a weakness when the individual is not aware of their vulnerability. Yes, I did say that. And the listener writes, I wanted to understand more about what you meant by this. Is it because an individual could inadvertently expose themselves to danger by lowering their armour? Because you remember in the vulnerability podcast, I was talking about your armour, business people putting on their suit of armour for the day. And what we want to develop is being able to put on your armour and take off your armour, or put up your shutters or take down your shutters at will. So this question is wanting to understand more about how vulnerability is only a weakness when the individual is not aware. Now, you might know by now that self-awareness, of course, is essential for your own development, and that's where it starts. So when you're not aware of your vulnerability or any other emotion really, then you're automatically at risk really, because you don't know. You don't know, to protect yourself, or you don't know to tackle a problem a certain way, or you haven't got your navigation system going, which I call your emotions, your navigation system. To answer this question, the idea that vulnerability is only a weakness when an individual is not aware of their vulnerability can be explained, I can explain it as a disconnection. So leaving your body when you're not aware of leaving your body happens all the time to us. How many times during the day do you realise you're not in your body? And you go, oh. And so the lack of self-awareness, so say you leave your body, and I often ask people, how do they know when they've left their body? And people say, well, I know I've left my body because I feel a bit numb, or I feel that I'm lost, or I don't really know what I'm doing, or I can't remember what I did, how I got in the car from A to B. I can't really remember what I did during the day. There's some good examples of how you can tell when you're not in your body. And so when you're not in your body and you're not aware that you're not in your body, you're at risk of acting out. So that could be yelling at a child, or being short with your partner, or creating an argument, or having an accident, or all kinds of things can happen when you're acting out and you don't know you're acting out. So when you're unaware in the world, you're at risk of doing something that is against your values or your goals. For example, when you reveal something about yourself at work, depending on the culture, of course, I'm talking about probably a disconnected culture here, it can be used against you later. And so we want to be aware, first of all, and we want to know what emotion we're feeling at any given time, so that we've got our navigation system and we're not just going through life without awareness. So hopefully that's answered that question of vulnerability is only a weakness when the individual's not aware of their vulnerabilities. So that is really not being aware is not being in your body. The next question is, you mentioned that vulnerability is the capacity to experience hurt as distinct from the state of actually being harmed. But I'm struggling a little to understand that concept. Is the capacity to experience hurt a measure of how deeply we can feel emotions? I'm curious not only about anger and sadness, as they come easily to me, but of emotions of joy and enthusiasm, which I was conditioned not to express. Yeah, it's a very good question. And I would hazard a guess here that you were conditioned, to the listener, you were conditioned not to express all emotion reading this. So, but it's great that you got to the point where you're curious about joy and enthusiasm, because that's different to what you've expressed being able to connect to before, anger and sadness. So the way I'm answering this one is with my own example. And for me, the concept is the example of feeling hurt. And I'll use an example of my experience a few years ago. I became curious about the reason I had more capacity to feel pain, the physical pain from a torn meniscus in my knee, than I had feeling the emotion we call hurt. So I could tolerate physical pain easier than emotional pain. So I was very curious about that. And both physical and emotional pain sting, but I was interested in my capacity for physical pain was greater than when I was feeling hurt. And I discovered that the hurt feeling felt like aching in the left side of my chest. And with this new information, I decided to practice connecting to the ache in my chest when it happened. And I developed a capacity to feel hurt. And now, after lots of practice, I can feel the ache when it happens. I focus on it, deeply connect, and guess what happens? It dissipates. And now it dissipates very quickly. But remember, I'm not attempting to get rid of the ache in my chest because it hurts. I am curious about it and connecting to it just because I want to, not to actually get rid of it. That's not my goal. And to the listener, I would say it sounds like you're more practiced at feeling anger and sadness, whereas you haven't had much practice with experiencing joy and enthusiasm. And the question is good news for you if you are exploring joy and enthusiasm, because that tells you that you're ready to expand and practice the other side of life. So you should celebrate that. So how to feel joy and enthusiasm when you've got no frame of reference for it? And the first step is being willing to explore something that you don't have any experience with. And your question indicates that you've achieved the first step by being aware of it. The second step involves identifying the experience of joy. Now this is a bit harder because you won't know what it feels like at first. So then you'll experiment with different feelings. That could be joy. You don't know. It could be just having a look around. And these feelings can only be felt in a moment, as with everything. They can be very subtle and you may not recognise them at first, but practicing and exploring what joy could feel like if you knew. Once you can recognise what could be a feeling of joy, have a go at the process I described above and see what happens. That is, you just connect to it. So that's an exciting progress for the listener to have a go at identifying what joy feels like. So the next question is, in the context of sharing what you believe with a loved one, you say not to become attached to a particular response. Is the discipline here to share without feeling the need to persuade? I often fall into the trap of having to be proven right, which invariably leads to a long and drawn-out conversation with loved ones. Well, we all know that experience, so thank you for sharing that. So my answer is around when I hear the listener say sharing what you believe with a loved one. So do you actually need to share what you believe? And it's an interesting point that sharing what you believe to make a point or to be right about your belief, if you are not interested in the other person's point of view. So in the context of genuine sharing with a loved one, this is mutual engagement. It's definitely not Q&A time or the Spanish Inquisition. And a lot of us who are looking to improve our communication will often get into, tit for tat or Q&A. It's not very fulfilling, that kind of, it's not really a conversation, but it's not very fulfilling at all. It's quite awful, and most people will avoid being in that situation. And that will fail because you both end up short or annoyed or anxious. So you can't really discover mutual engagement in a rushed moment. Like, you can't do it when you're getting the kids off to school, for instance. You need to prioritise important conversations and make space, make time for these important conversations, especially if you're practicing and you're not really good at it yet. So what is genuine engagement and what is it not? You need space and time, as I said, and it helps if both of you are in your body. So you might have a bit of a warm up by exploring what's important to you or how to get in your body. It can work if you're the only one in your body. Don't need two, because as you inquire and take a curious perspective about your loved one, the conversation can flow from that place. And remember, there's no right or wrong, and there's only perception. Everyone's perception is valid. So if the listener really wanting to be right, that's not going to work very well. So just to summarise that question, because it's quite long, that answer. Make space, time and space. Don't rush a deep conversation. Make space. And see if you can be in your body and be curious about not only your perspective but the other's perspective as well. And remember, there's no right or wrong. So hopefully that answers that inquiry. The next question is, you say to avoid judging the judge. What do you mean by this? Is it judging ourselves for having judgmental thoughts rather than accepting that judgment is a part of life and a tool for understanding more about ourselves and our lens? Well, thank you for pointing this out, because I actually didn't mean to say avoid judging the judge, because that's not what I believe. The topic of judgment is interesting because sometimes we fall into old habits and assume that we shouldn't judge. And I hear this all the time, we shouldn't judge. Actually, we all judge. So we judge ourselves and other people all the time. Some people judge more than others, and when we experience a harshly judgmental person, it's difficult to be around them for too long. So the bottom line is, I'm not saying that judgment is bad or that the aim is not to judge at all. So thank you for picking that up. The aim is to notice your judgment in the moment and just let it be there. It will pass. That is the first step in practicing noticing your judgments. Also, when you develop compassion for yourself, you automatically become less judgmental. I've noticed that within myself. At times you may notice that you're judging yourself for judging. And I call this judge the judge. When you notice you are judging yourself for judging someone else, it's a bit of a twister, then that's a normal part of the process. So judge the judge is not wrong as well. It's fine, you just notice it when you see it. So I hope that my answers have adequately answered your questions. And thank you for taking the time and the energy to send me your questions. As you know, I love Q&A. I'll see you next time.
Well, that's a wrap. The Emotion Connection is produced by Sharon Fay and her team at the Emotion Research Institute. With a vision to help people feel, this is just one way we're spreading the word. From our hub in Perth, Western Australia, our goal is to advance global research on human emotion and bring together the world's best scholars to conduct rigorous research into emotion all in one place. Would you like to help? Do you have feedback or suggestions? We'd love to hear from you. Visit emotionresearch.com.au to get in touch, sign up to our newsletter and learn more. If you'd like to support our work, make a donation. Remember, your generosity fuels our vision and contributions over $2 Australian are tax deductible. See you next time.